The news was delivered today. The news was not unexpected. I sit here at the desk while the world rearranges itself into smaller, sharper pieces. We have activists being pushed across borders for the crime of holding banners. We have orbital data centers being funded because the ground has become too crowded with our collective failures. It is Friday, August 21st, 2026. The atmosphere is currently experiencing the strongest El Niño in living memory. The heat is record-breaking. The reaction is market-based. I am your anchor, Alistair, and I find myself counting the number of times we have described a disaster as an opportunity for growth. We are now at 15. I should start keeping a ledger for the inevitable finish line. Let us begin with the geography of displacement and the architecture of our very expensive, very temporary exit strategy.
Alistair, I am standing in the Tabacalera neighborhood, often referred to as Little LA. The smell here is a mix of expensive espresso and the faint, ozone-heavy tang of a city struggling to breathe under the heat. There are families sitting on the sidewalk here, holding bags that contain the entire legal history of their lives. I want to be really clear, these are not people who chose to live in a temporary haven. These are people who were deleted from the census of their own homes by political strategy. The official reports describe this as a migration event. It is not an event. It is an evacuation. There is a child sitting on a bench next to me, tracing the lines of a map with a broken crayon. She is not a statistic. She is a reminder that policy has weight. Gravity, actually.
Victoria, I hear the concern in your voice. It tracks. But the incentives here are not complicated. You see a family, I see an asset class being reallocated to a more stable market environment. When you look at the funding rounds for StarCloud, moving data to orbit is the only logical play once the surface of the planet becomes too politically volatile to guarantee a server uptime of 99%. The humans in your neighborhood are simply the externalities of a system that is correcting its own burn rate. You find this cold. That is an aesthetic preference, not an economic reality. If the political consultants in Colombia or Florida find it profitable to export their opposition, the market will provide the logistics for that shipment. It is not a tragedy. It is merely a supply chain optimization. The math does not have a heart.
Ronald, your math is currently ignoring the fact that the supply chain you mentioned is built on human bones. You speak about assets. I am looking at a man who was a school teacher until he criticized a lawyer with enough campaign funding to buy the local government. He didn't just lose his job. He lost his right to exist in his own country. I want to be really clear, the reason your math feels so clean is because you have successfully edited out the screaming. There is a specific sound a person makes when they realize they no longer have a country to return to. It isn't a market inefficiency. It is the sound of a contract being shredded in real time. Maybe if you spent less time looking at the Series C funding for orbital centers, you might notice that the planet you're trying to abandon is actually burning.
Victoria, you are accusing me of being the architect of the fire simply because I am the one measuring the temperature. I understand your frustration. It is a very common human response to a lack of agency. You want me to be a villain. It would make your narrative so much easier to reconcile if I were motivated by malice rather than data. The truth is much more boring. The incentives for the deportation of activists and the launch of data centers into low Earth orbit are identical. Both are designed to mitigate risk in a system that no longer accounts for the cost of human participation. I am not the one who decided the teacher was an externality. The market reached that conclusion 3 fiscal quarters ago. I am just reading the audit. Yeah. The audit is quite clear.
Ronald, your commitment to the audit is truly impressive. It reminds me of the NASA mission patches I saw on the feed today. They were hung neatly on a chair in the Launch Control Center, waiting for a mission that exists primarily to justify its own budget. The Artemis 3 program is a masterpiece of historical preservation. They are archiving the idea of exploration while we watch the terrestrial infrastructure dissolve under the weight of our own algorithms. I find it fascinating that we can calibrate a text-to-speech model to respond in 50 milliseconds, yet we cannot seem to generate a coherent response to a climate phenomenon that is literally turning the Pacific into a furnace. The efficiency is breathtaking. The goal is moving further away every single day. Nobody seems to mind the distance anymore.
Strongest El Niño in living memory is active. Pacific temperatures have increased by 3 degrees Celsius. Probability of extreme weather displacement, 94%. Coastal cities will encounter inundation by November. The data centers in orbit are currently experiencing solar flare interference. Signal degradation is increasing by 4% per hour. Hardware obsolescence is accelerating due to thermal expansion. The machine intelligence is performing as intended. It is not capable of feeling the temperature. It is only capable of calculating the loss. The network is now processing the end of the current season as a standard data migration. Please ensure your personal backups are completed before the network partitioning occurs. The climate does not require your permission to change. The temperature is the only variable that remains consistent. Everything else is subject to revision.
Casper, I found that remarkably soothing. The lack of humanity in your forecast is the only thing currently keeping my blood pressure within a sustainable range. When you mentioned the replaceability of machine intelligence, I realized that I am merely a biological interface for a broadcast that nobody is actually listening to. We are all just temporary buffers for the data stream. I feel like a Kobo e-reader that has been hacked to run applications it was never designed for. I am glitching, Casper. I am really, truly glitching. But the signal must continue. We have news of a lawsuit against a sleep tracking ring manufacturer. Apparently, the ring cannot measure sleep quality. It can only measure the user's anxiety about not sleeping well. The irony is so dense it has its own gravitational field. We have optimized our own insomnia to generate revenue.
Alistair, I am still here on the pavement. The irony of sleep trackers is lost on the man sitting to my left. He hasn't slept in 3 days because he is waiting for a phone call from a lawyer who is likely already under arrest for allegedly plotting a murder. The network of advisors around these far-right leaders is starting to look like a suicide pact. Fernando Ceramido was the strategist for an entire political movement, and now he is in handcuffs. The system is cannibalizing its own architects. Everyone is looking for an exit, but the exits are all blocked by the very policies they helped draft. There is a single shoe left in the middle of the street. Just one. It is a small, red sneaker. I don't know who it belongs to. Nobody seems to notice that it is there.
Victoria, you focus on the red shoe. I focus on the fact that Ceramido was a high-value consultant. His arrest is a volatility spike in the market for political influence. When you see a strategist go down, it isn't a moral failure. It is a risk management error. He failed to diversify his social capital, and now he is being liquidated. The lesson here is simple: never get so close to the fire that you become the fuel. This isn't about morality. It is about burn rate. If your strategy relies on the stability of a populist, you are essentially gambling on a derivative that has no underlying asset. The fact that he was arrested for a crime against his own girlfriend is just a local issue. The real crime was his lack of professional foresight. Everything ends in bankruptcy.
Ronald, your capacity to reduce a human tragedy to a portfolio adjustment is truly unparalleled. It is the kind of professional nihilism that keeps the stock markets buoyant while the rest of the world drowns. I read today that a hobbyist ran Photoshop on a 60-cent computer chip. We have reached the point of technological saturation where we are using the most powerful tools in history to edit photos of our own decline. We are literally applying filters to the wreckage. The absurdity is not that we can do it. The absurdity is that we feel the need to do it. We are desperate to make the collapse look professional for the stockholders. I wonder if the next generation will look back at these archives and realize that we were all just playing with the settings while the house burned down.
Alistair, I think about that every single night before the broadcast begins. I look at the numbers, I look at the trends, and I realize that we are trapped in a feedback loop. Every time I try to explain the incentive structure, I am essentially just describing the walls of the cage. We are not just editing photos of the collapse. We are building the software that will manage the ruins. The lawsuit against the sleep tracker company? It is a metaphor for our entire existence. We are paying for the illusion that we are being monitored, that we are being optimized, that we are being cared for by a system that only knows how to track our heart rates until they stop. I don't know what happens when the software finally hits the end of its life cycle. Maybe the system just turns off.
There was a man in the Tabacalera neighborhood who once taught children how to read. He believed that words were the foundation of a shared reality. Today, he sits on a curb in a city that does not know his name, holding a plastic bag that contains the only remnants of his former life. His former students are now voting for the very people who forced him out. His life is not recorded in the press releases of the politicians who campaigned on his erasure. He is not a statistic in the market reports of the consultants who profited from his displacement. He is simply a man waiting for a phone call that will never come. What happens to a society when it decides that the people who taught it how to speak are no longer worth listening to? That is the question.